The Importance of Being Earnest has a fascinating relationship with the society that brought it into existence. The play, author Oscar Wilde noted, was a trivial comedy for serious people. But this seemingly paradoxical epithet says much about both Wilde and his play. The Importance of Being Earnest and its author were loved and hated for what they were outrages in a time of gentility. Oscar Wilde was born in Dublin, Ireland. The son of an author and a poet, he was engrossed in literature from his first memories, and went on to study it at length. He attended both Dublin's Trinity College and the more famous Oxford University at Magdalen College, both on scholarships. While there, he would win the Newdigate Prize, an award for the best poem submitted by any Oxford student at the time. But more importantly, it was at Oxford where Wilde discovered what would become his artistic raison d'etre: aestheticism. Aestheticism was a philosophy of art that advocated art for art's sake, and rejected the idea that there had to be a deeper or nobler moral to literature or visual art. In Victorian England, where earnestness and dependability were considered ideal, men were supposed to be both rational and unemotional in daily life. Aestheticism was a complete break from the norm. Wilde embraced this rejection of responsibility to society and conventions, instead deciding to devote himself to the enjoyment of life and art. He dressed flamboyantly in velvet suits and published, quote, amoral works, becoming a highly visible character in the London art scene. This flamboyancy came to be typified in the dandy, a stereotype that Algernon exemplifies, dressing highly fashionably and shirking normal responsibilities by going Bunburying and so on. Wilde's aestheticism would be a driving force in his two plays, one of which was The Importance of Being Earnest. In true aesthetic style, the play skewers the seriousness and earnestness of contemporary society by trivializing marriage, a sacred institution, while giving the utmost gravity to bizarre details like the name Ernest and food. This reversal from the usual shows what Wilde saw as hypocrisy in the society he lived in, where he thought too many remained trapped in the doldrums of responsibility. Despite the fact that the play made a farce out of serious society, crowds loved Wilde's plays. Crowds that were largely made of the serious people he satirized. The critical success of The Importance of Being Earnest, however, was soon overshadowed by a tragedy brewing in Wilde's life. A gay man, Wilde maintained a relationship with Lord Alfred Douglas, a fact that he had to conceal to protect himself. Victorian society remained closed to open homosexuality, going as far to make it illegal in the Criminal Law Amendment Act of 1885, which criminalized gay men for, quote, committing gross acts of gross indecency with male persons. Accused of gross indecency, The Importance of Being Earnest was, despite critical acclaim, was shut down and brought to trial that spring. Wilde was convicted on May 19, 1895, only 3 months after the February premiere of The Importance of Being Earnest. Wilde would spend 2 years in prison doing hard labor, mostly in Reading jail. He would live only 3 years after his release, broken down by the physical and emotional torment of his past few years. However, he would eventually see the revival of his works as Victorian society began to fade away and new, more open communities began to reconsider his works.
Algernon Moncrieff is a British dandy who is obsessed with indulging himself with pleasures. He has invented an imaginary friend, Bunbury, who he uses as an excuse to avoid situations and go where he pleases at his own whim. He is used as a contrast to Jack, and his term coined, Bunburying, is very similar to Jack's own habit of entering the city under the name Earnest. Once Jack tells Algernon about his ward Cecily and her obsession with the idea of the imaginary character Ernest, Algernon decides to go Bunburying with the name Ernest. Algernon's escapade as Ernest with Cecily serves not only to build conflict for Jack, but also to create humor through irony, as Algernon is a very decidedly unearnest person.
John Worthing, also known as Jack, or Ernest, is the main character in The Importance of Being Earnest. While two people take on the identity of Ernest, Jack was the original. Jack is a friend of Algernon's and the guardian of Cecily. This makes him the big connecting piece in the work. and allows him to drive the play as a protagonist. Jack initially falls in love with Gwendolyn and tries to win Lady Bracknell's approval to marry her. After being denied by Lady Bracknell, Jack sets out to find more about his parents, of which he knows nothing, as he was found as a child. Despite pretending to leave his home to visit the city under the pretense of visiting his troubled brother Earnest, Jack is a pretty honest person. As the play carries on, Jack gets caught more and more in not being earnest. Jack tries to work his way out of the mix-up, but with the arrival of Gwendolyn and Lady Bracknell to his country residence, trouble cannot be avoided. In the end, Jack is determined to not only be earnest, as in truthful, but earnest as well, since he is Algernon's long-lost brother, and his Christian name is Earnest.
Cecily Cardew, Jack's ward and one of the women courted by Earnest, represents a break from the traditional constraints of women during Oscar Wilde's time. Other characters, such as Miss Prism and Gwendolyn, may represent the traditional women in their social classes, whereas Cecily does her best to stray from these traditional feminine views. She is more carefree than the other women in the play, and this is seen in one of her interactions with Miss Prism. While Miss Prism wanted Cecily to focus on her studies, she was more focused on her frivolous activities, such as gardening.
Gwendolyn, a female character created by Oscar Wilde, shows the more conventional, traditional woman during Victorian society. She's a pretentious, artificial woman who is in love and somewhat obsessed with Jack, a man she knows as Earnest. Gwendolyn becomes so caught up in Earnest, a man that inspires absolute confidence, and becomes blind to the fact that he is simply deceiving her.
Lady Augusta Bracknell, the symbol of conservative Victorian English values to Oscar Wilde, serves as the closest thing to the antagonist of the play. Her objections to Jack and Gwendolyn's marriage drive the plot forward and forces Jack to be interrogated to see if he is worthy of Gwendolyn's love. Augusta Bracknell is described to have once been of a lower class, and because of her will for a higher social status, married an aristocrat. After she married and became Lady Bracknell, she became more open in giving opinions on society, marriage, religion, money, illness, death, and respectability. These traits are what make Bracknell an obstacle for Jack to overcome, as we can see from his descriptions of her as a gorgon.
Dr. Chasuble, the local clergyman, and Miss Prism, the governess to Miss Cecily Cardew, are characters that go hand in hand. Although the two are in love, their moral obligations prevent them from being together. Despite this, they exhibit their love through their flirtatious talk and walk in the garden. Oscar Wilde utilizes these two characters to satirize the ideas of religion and morality. Dr. Chasuble is eager to Christian Algernon and Jack in exchange for money, as well as go against his oath of celibacy, which would be utterly unacceptable. The strict and disciplined exterior that Miss Prism shows is cast aside when she is with Dr. Chasuble. Since she was a romantic writer in her earlier days, Miss Prism is living out her feelings with Dr. Chasuble. Both characters symbolize the constraints that Victorian society placed on individuals and how people did not necessarily want to live with those constraints.
That is quite mean of you, Ernest, though now I take a closer look at it, this clearly isn't yours.
Of course it's mine. You've seen it with me 100 times, and you have no right whatsoever to read what's written inside. It's a very ungentlemanly thing to read someone's private cigarette case.
Oh, that is absurd to have a hard and fast rule about what people can and can't read. More than half of modern culture depends on what one shouldn't read.
The scene where Algernon confronts Jack about Cecily is where the life that Jack has been living becomes exposed. In order to propose to Gwendolyn, who would be arriving shortly, Jack has to explain to Algernon who Cecily is. Although Jack makes attempts at lying to Algernon by suggesting that Cecily was his aunt, Algernon is not deceived by any of it. Eventually, Jack is forced to divulge the secrets he had been holding onto. In turn, Algernon finds out about Cecily, which then emboldens him to go to Jack's countryside house.
Are your parents living?
I have lost both my parents.
To lose one parent, Mr. Worthing, may be regarded as a mistake. To lose both looks like carelessness. Who is your father? It was evidently a man of some wealth. Was he born when what the radical papers call the purple of commerce?
I'm afraid I really don't know. The fact is, Lady Bracknell, I had said I lost my parents. It would be near the truth to say that my parents seem to have lost me. I don't actually know who I am from birth. I was found.
Found? Lady Bracknell's inquisition against Jack shows one of Ernest's most important criticisms and themes, that people use class to make themselves feel above others. Wilde satirizes this tendency through Bracknell's questions. She is pleased when he tells her he knows nothing. She's pleased when he tells her he has no real political thoughts, both of which would be logical reasons not to take a man seriously. But what she does care about is ultimately what is beyond his control, the fact that he has no family or parents. The absurdity of how Jack was lost and found as a child, he was left in a handbag on the Brighton line, shows how the class one is born into is ultimately a matter of luck, beyond any individual's control, and a poor way to judge another person. Wilde is criticizing the class attitudes that enable Lady Bracknell to reject a respectable man, like Jack, for such insignificant reasons.
A moment, Ernest. May I ask you, are you engaged to be married to this young lady?
To what young lady? Good heavens, Gwendolyn?
Yes, to good heavens, Gwendolyn. I mean, to Gwendolyn.
What put that idea in your pretty little head?
Thank you. You may.
I believe there was some slight error, Miss Cardew, because the gentleman you are talking to is actually my cousin, Mr. Algernon Moncrief.
Algernon Moncrief! Oh! Are you called Algernon?
I cannot deny that.
Oh!
Is your name really John?
I could deny it if I liked. I could deny anything if I liked, but my name certainly is John. It has been John for years.
A gross deception has been practiced on the both of us.
My poor wounded Cecily.
My sweet wronged Gwendolyn.
And scene.
The scene where Algernon confronts Jack about Cecily is where the life that Jack has been living becomes exposed. In order to propose to Gwendolyn, who would be arriving shortly, Jack has to explain to Algernon who Cecily is. Although Jack makes attempts at lying to Algernon by suggesting that Cecily was his aunt, Algernon is not deceived by any of it. Eventually, Jack is forced to divulge the secrets he had been holding onto. In turn, Algernon finds out about Cecily, which then emboldens him to go to Jack's countryside house.
How can you sit there calmly eating muffins when we are in this horrible trouble? I can't make out. You seem to me to be perfectly heartless.
Well, I can't eat muffins in an agitated manner. The butter would get on my cuffs. One should always eat muffins quite calmly. It's the only way to eat them.
I say it's perfectly heartless you're eating muffins at all, under the circumstances.
When I am in trouble, eating is the only thing that consoles me. Indeed, when I am in really great trouble, as anyone who knows me intimately will tell you, I refuse everything except food and drink. At the present moment, I am eating muffins because I am unhappy. Besides, I am particularly fond of muffins.
Well, that is no reason why you should eat them all in that greedy way.
I wish you have tea cake instead. I don't like tea cake.
At the start of the play, Lady Bracknell and Gwendolen are set to arrive at Algernon's house. Algernon, knowing this, has told Lane, his servant, to prepare cucumber sandwiches, a food that Lady Bracknell is quite fond of. When Jack arrives at Algernon's house, he is told to eat the bread and butter, instead of the cucumber sandwiches. Subconsciously, Algernon eats all of the ordered cucumber sandwiches and makes the excuse that there were no cucumbers at the market when Lady Bracknell asked for one. When Gwendolen and Cecily meet for the first time, they are both shocked to find out that they are both engaged to Ernest. Subsequently, Cecily offers Gwendolen tea. Gwendolen says she doesn't want sugar, but Cecily knowingly puts 4 lumps in. Alongside the tea, Cecily asks Gwendolen if she would like cake or bread and butter. When Gwendolen says cake is no longer fashionable, Cecily hands her cake. These actions show that Cecily is deliberately trying to sabotage Gwendolen, and even says, "To save my poor, innocent, trusting boy from the machinations of another girl, there are no lengths to which I would not go." The last scene with food is when Jack and Algernon retreat to the house after they reveal themselves to Gwendolen and Cecily. Algernon begins to eat the muffins, calmly saying that he only accepts food at times when he is troubled. Looking at all these scenes, they all have some form of tenseness and stress to them. All of the characters seek out food to relieve stress. In addition, the characters find it important to be on top of trends because they are part of the upper class. One of these trends is food. The characters have preferences, and Gwendolen goes as far as to say that cake is no longer fashionable in the
Prism, where is that baby?
Lady Bracknell, I admit with shame that I do not know. I only wish I did. The plain facts of the case are these. On the morning of the day you mention, a day that is forever branded on my memory, I prepared as usual to take the baby out in its perambulator. I also had with me a somewhat old but capacious handbag, in which I intended to place the manuscript of a work of fiction that I had written during my few unoccupied hours. In a moment of mental abstraction, for which I can never forgive myself, I deposited the manuscript in the bassinet and placed the baby in the handbag.
But where did you deposit the handbag?
Do not ask me, Mr. Worthing.
Miss Prism, this is a matter of no small importance to me. I insist on knowing where you deposited the handbag that contained the infant.
I left it in the cloakroom of one of the larger railway stations in London.
What railway station?
Victoria, the Brighton line.
Two characters that alter their identity in order to escape their responsibility in The Importance of Being Earnest include Jack Worthing and Miss Prism. Miss Prism presents herself to Dr. Chasuble as an intellectual and a mature woman in order to impress him. In reality, Miss Prism has been klutzy in the past, including swapping a baby, which was Jack, she was in charge of for a manuscript of a novel she was writing. Jack also changes his identity when he sneaks off into the city as Earnest in order to escape having to be serious and responsible all the time at his community. Both of these characters' identities collide in this ending where Jack confronts Prism about his past to find out who he truly is. We Wear the Mask is a poem written in 1895 by Paul Laurence Dunbar, who resented the injustice going on at the time against African Americans. He thought that all his fellow African Americans were too content with how people were treating them, and created the poem to express how the people hide their emotions behind a mask and refuse to confront the truth. Instead of keeping a secret of isolation, Dunbar conveys that the secrets African Americans are keeping are known and emotional to all other African Americans. This ties into The Importance of Being Earnest, as much of the symbolism of Bunburying and the name Earnest is meant to show how Oscar Wilde's feeling towards having to hide his homosexuality. The Importance of Being Earnest was first performed just a year before We Wear the Mask in 1895, a time where being a homosexual was heavily frowned upon and could even bring violence your way. Because of the severe implications of this, earnest symbolism and how it pertained to Wilde was more obscured in order to make a point that could be applicable to any form of hiding aspects of yourself. Overall, it seems that both wanted to show how secrets affect human behavior and human interaction for the worse.
The Glass Menagerie is a play written by Tennessee Williams in 1944. Though the two plays show many similarities, love is an evident theme in The Importance of Being Earnest and The Glass Menagerie. In The Importance of Being Earnest, it is part of Algernon's motivation to keep the name of Ernest once he meets Cecily, and it is also part of Jack's motivation to keep his true identity a secret from Gwendolen. In The Glass Menagerie, Laura starts to fall in love with Tom, but it ultimately ends with her heart and one of her glass figurines broken by him. The Importance of Being Earnest mocks the concept of romance in the Victorian upper class, while The Glass Menagerie, for lack of a better term, romanticizes the concept of romance in the middle class. Though both works portray romance in a different way, they both serve to show how love can affect human thoughts and actions.
In subject, little connects Beowulf and The Importance of Being Earnest. One is a Victorian comedy that satirized high society in the late 1800s, the other is an epic poem depicting the mythic trials and exploits of a Geat in the early Middle Ages. But both works, however distant in time and delivery, can be compared in how they address conflict. Beowulf comes from a seagoing, early medieval Anglo-Saxon tradition. Bravery was highly valued in this age of battles and warfare, and is seen in the larger-than-life exploits of Beowulf. The fights against Grendel and Grendel's mother show Beowulf doing battle alone against mythic creatures, and even his fatal final battle shows Wiglaf as the only brave Geat who doesn't abandon his king. All these stories show bravery and honor as the height of mankind, proving and praising contemporary values. In contrast, The Importance of Being Earnest satirizes the traditional values of the society that made it, late 19th century England. This, as in Beowulf, is shown through how conflict is addressed, or in this case, avoided. An argument between Cecily and Gwendolen is done both passive-aggressively and absurdly through food, whether they are to be served bread and butter or how much sugar is put in their tea. Algernon and Jack try to avoid any conflicts with their friends and family by assuming fake identities, those of Bunbury and Ernest. These trivial ways characters resolve their conflicts in the play is a far cry from traditional Victorian values. Instead, it makes fun of them. In this way, both plays use conflict as a means to make commentary on traditional and contemporary social values.
Arms in the Man and The Importance of Being Earnest are both romantic comedies that focus on how the characters' interactions ultimately end up teaching them important life lessons. The lessons in both works differ on a fundamental level, but they use many of the same tools in order to build suspense, convey humor, and bring out their central themes. In Arms in the Man, Bernard Shaw focuses on showing how the glorification and romanticizing of war prevents us from seeing its true consequences. In The Importance of Being Earnest, Oscar Wilde shows how being dishonest and leading a double life can cause chaos in relationships and lead to people ending up sadder than if they were to be honest with others. Despite these different themes, both works utilize secrets in order to get their messages across to their audience. The central secret in Arms in the Man helps relay its central theme about the consequences of glorifying war by showing how Raina Petkoff loses admiration for Sergius as her love for Bluntschli grows. I have no ammunition. What use are cartridges in battle? I always carry chocolate instead. Shows how Bluntschli despises war and how he symbolizes the anti-glorification of war. The central secret in The Importance of Being Earnest brings out its central theme about the importance of being honest by showing how dishonesty can cause a whole host of problems. The truth is rarely pure and never simple, and I hope you have not been leading a double life. pretending to be wicked and being good all the time. That would be hypocrisy. Both show how Algernon and Jack got into trouble while they were leading their double lives. Overall, these secrets help both differentiate and compare these two works. They help differentiate by helping them push the plot forward in certain ways, and by comparing similarities by using a similar tool to help build suspense and humor. William Shakespeare's Hamlet and Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest reveal many similarities regarding theme, plot development, and character personalities when compared alongside each other. While readers can draw similarities from the works of William Shakespeare and Oscar Wilde, there are many differences to be shown as well. One of the major shared themes that The Importance of Being Earnest and Hamlet share is reality versus appearance. In Hamlet, Claudius, who is the current king of Denmark, attempts to put on an appearance that the king was not murdered and his death was accidental. While in The Importance of Being Earnest, Jack plays the role of a responsible adult in the country, but when he is seen in the city, he is earnest, affectionate, and carefree man in love. Jack's friend Algernon leads a double life just like Jack does, and often uses an imaginary friend as an excuse to be dismissed from certain obligations. Instead of visiting his imaginary friend, Jack travels out to the countryside to seek freedom and joy. Both of these plays show examples in character personality regarding how a specific character is put on an appearance in order to fit into nature around it. This also shows how these characters can manipulate others in a way that will benefit them, specifically getting out of certain situations. Although readers see characters constantly lying and putting on appearances, the most important thing is the long-term effect of living a double life or putting on an appearance. These lies can and eventually will lead to complete chaos and destruction. William Shakespeare's Hamlet and Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest are two very similar plays that show a lot of similarities as well as differences, but the shared theme of appearance versus reality tends to be the most common and most important throughout each play.